So what I have discovered is with St. Augustine, there have been numerous misinterpretations of Augustine. Part of this is because very few people, because of the lack of the printing press, had a full copy of Augustine. And therefore there were these paraphrases, there were these fractions of it, fragments of it, that people had, and people would misquote it. So therefore there was a huge amount of misinterpretation of Augustine. That's not to say that Augustine didn't also have certain leanings which were, shall we say, Neoplatonic or Manichaean. There's certainly plenty of accusations. And I did show some evidence from a book which I made available to everyone, where they could see where the source was. Okay, so I wasn't making a claim out of whole cloth. Of course, someone got very upset and ran to their mommy and went to complain to their mommy. And of course, this may or may not have consequences, but let's just say that certain people ignored everything else I said, hyper-focused on that, and went to make a complaint and tried to get me cancelled. So whoever you are, good job. So, yeah. Anyway, now, error indeed, as Saint Irenaeus tells us, error indeed is never set forth in its naked deformity, lest being thus exposed, it should at once be detected. So in other words, when people lie, they will deceive. Yes, Pedro Jr., someone took exception to my statement. Now, it must be mentioned that when the church makes a saint, this does not imply that the saint was perfect, that they never made an error. What it implies is that their contribution to the church was of such great magnitude in theology and doctrine that they were recognized for their amazing contributions, not because they never made an error, not because they never slipped up, not because they never put a word wrong. Now, of course, what we're seeing is the modern theology is no investigation, no discussion, just condemnation, and no forgiveness. That seems to be where we are. I don't know if that's the Catholic way. Do let me know if that's the Catholic doctrine. But yeah, but apparently that's where we might be heading. So Irenaeus goes on to tell us, but it is craftily decked out in an attractive dress, so as by its outward form to make it appear to the inexperienced, ridiculous as the expression may seem, more true than the truth itself. So that is what Saint Irenaeus has to say to us, and let's keep these words in mind as we go forward. And he said that these men falsify the oracles of God and prove themselves evil interpreters of the good word of revelation. They also overthrow the faith of many by drawing them away under a pretense of superior knowledge. By means of specious and plausible words, they cunningly allure the simple-minded to inquire into their system. So here we must be warned. We know that the book of John, for instance, was written as a polemic against the Gnostics. St. Paul writes extensively against the Gnostics. We've covered that in many of my shows, where much of the Bible, New Testament, is a warning against the Gnostics. The Nicene Creed is a warning against the Gnostics. It's the defense of Orthodox faith, smaller Orthodox faith, against the Gnostics. Now, of course, what you have is evidence from within the New Testament that the Gnostics were in the church. They were clothed in the clothes of the church. They were in the words of the church, right? But these were wolves in sheep's clothing, and eventually they revealed themselves. They tried to draw others astray the way that they had gone astray. Misery loves company. So who was Saint Irenaeus? So this one's going to be very hard-hitting, and I will tell you that once you look at the conclusions of Irenaeus, so do remember, John Calvin, as we've discussed, John Calvin wrote a long letter to the Bishop Sadoleto, and John Calvin explicitly stated that his Calvinism and that Protestantism was closer to the truth of the early church than was the Catholic Church, that the Catholic Church was far from history, far from tradition, and that his Calvinism and Protestantism in general, was the form of the original church. This was the historical claim made by John Calvin. In fact, Luther and others also claimed that they were the original church. We're going to look now at one of the greatest church fathers, Saint Irenaeus, and I will tell you, spoiler, flat out, he utterly contradicts both Calvin and Luther. So therefore, either Saint Irenaeus is lying, or Calvin is wrong, or Calvin is lying, or one, maybe a little bit of both. So either the Protestant reformers are wrong, or Saint Irenaeus is wrong. If you think Irenaeus is right, drop a 1. If you think the reformers are right, drop a 2. But then we have to decide which one is wrong here today. Okay. All right. So Saint Irenaeus, he was born in Smyrna, now Izmir, in Turkey, he was Greek, his parents were Greek. And his period is like roughly 120, 140 to 200, 203. Okay, I guess that's fairly unanimous. Saint Irenaeus is right. Now, unfortunately, logically, this must mean the reformers were wrong. And we're going to see exactly that. He studied under Polycarp. Now, Polycarp is the last known living connection to the apostles and a disciple of John.